Good morning, everyone. My name is Helge Blokkesrud, and it's a great pleasure for me, on behalf of the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, to welcome you to this seminar today on Armenia-Turkey relations. And it's especially a great pleasure to introduce to you today's speaker, Dr. Vahram Ter-Matevosyan, assistant professor at the American University of Armenia and head of the Turkish Studies Department at the Institute of Oriental Studies at the Armenian Academy of Sciences. Vahram specializes in Turkish domestic and foreign policy, regional security, and conflicts in the post-Soviet area. And he has strong links to Norway. He holds a doctorate. Holds a Doctor of Philosophy degree from the University of Bergen, and has also a long-standing cooperation with NUPI within research. Today he's going to speak on Armenia-Turkey relations, torn between the past and the future. Today there are more than 25 years since Turkey first recognized Armenian independence. Nevertheless, to this day, the state borders between these two states are hermetically sealed. Moreover, the two countries have so far failed to establish bilateral diplomatic relations. This stalemate and lack of development of bilateral ties significantly hinder the development not only of landlocked Armenia, but also the eastern regions of Turkey. And in his presentation, Vahram will discuss various past efforts to overcome this impasse and establish diplomatic relations, as well as look at current obstacles that impede the establishment of bilateral ties between these two countries. Vahram will speak for some 40 minutes, and then we will open up the floor for Q&A. And I should also inform you that the whole event is streamed online. So welcome also to those who follow this event on our YouTube channel. But without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Vahram, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming this early morning. It was Helge who set up the timing in the morning. I would ask to make it a little bit later. So I want to thank Helge first of all. It's always nice to be back at NUPI. I have been here first time in 2010, and Helge is the kind of person who pushes us to do more research and to be very productive in research. And thank you, Helge, once again for setting up this event. Yes, so today I'll be talking about a topic that I imagine is not in the headlines and in the news streams of Norway, and that is Armenia-Turkey relations. I've been, for the first time, I professionally came across with this topic in 2008 when Armenia hosted the president of Turkey, Abdullah Gül, who came to visit to Armenia. And at that time I was asked to be the head of the press center because we had many journalists coming from all over the world, and I was responsible for hosting these journalists so that they could cover the visit of President Gül to Armenia, and also cover the first football game between Armenia and Turkish national teams. And then after that I started to get involved in different projects related to Armenia-Turkey relations. And now here I am after 10, 11 years of research, and I'll be glad to share some of the insights that I have on this problem. Okay, this This is a major. This is an outline. So I'll be talking about the background of the problem in passing, and then I'll be visiting some of the established interpretations when we do the research on this, when we talk about this topic. And then I'll be talking about the difficulties of diplomacy in geopolitics when we approach and when we talk about Turkish-Armenian relations, and then the Armenian Genocide discourse, how that plays in the whole process, and then the way forward. So at the very beginning, let me clarify that when we talk about Armenia-Turkey relations and Armenian-Turkish relations, a distinction should be made. When we talk about Armenia-Turkey relations, it's mostly about bilateral relations. It's mostly about interstate relations, whereas Armenian-Turkish relations involve not only the societies, civil societies, but also Armenian diaspora. Because when we talk about these reconciliation efforts that have been going on for years now, the Armenian diaspora is a factor that cannot be ignored. I'm sure most of you know that there are more Armenians living outside of Armenia. Overall, according to different calculations, there are around 10 million Armenians, and only 3 of them live in Armenia. Okay, so back in 1991, in December, when the Soviet Union collapsed, everything looked very nice at the beginning. There were some diplomatic contacts at the very beginning of independence of Armenia, and Turkey was one of the first countries to recognize Armenia's independence. It was in December, and Armenia's independence was recognized along with other post-Soviet states. And there were some businessmen who visited Armenia, and there were initial contacts were established. The Turkish ambassador to Moscow, he visited Armenia, and then everything seemed so nice and smooth. So there were all the indications that Turkey was going to establish diplomatic relations with Armenia. Moreover, even a destination was picked in Ankara to build an Armenian embassy in Ankara. So everything was flowing logically, and then things started to go outside of control of both states, and then so until now, Turkey doesn't establish diplomatic relations with Armenia. As a result of this, there has been no vital channel of communication, diplomatic communication. So that signifies the fact that it has been problematic for 2 states to exchange diplomatic letters. The only until 2004, it was in Moscow that Armenian embassy in Moscow and Turkish embassy in Moscow, they were using the Moscow as a place to meet and to exchange diplomatic letters. But starting from 2004, that embassy, the Turkish embassy in Tbilisi, was used as a channel of communication. So when there is an exchange of letters between Turkey and Armenia, Georgia and Tbilisi is a place where they exchange letters. In 1992, Armenia was invited in this Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization, and until now, Armenia is part of this organization, and it was a Turkish initiative. And now Armenia has only 1 diplomat in Turkey. He's in Istanbul, and that's the only diplomat, or there actually are 2. The 2 diplomats that we have in Istanbul, but it's mostly he doesn't have any mission and mandate to do a diplomatic work, to do consular affairs. He's just there in order to facilitate Armenia's activities in the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization. As a result of this, until now, some of the practical issues are the legacy of Soviet time arrangements. In the border management and joint management of the Akhurian Dam, this is a major water reservoir that was opened in 1936, and it was when the Turkish Prime Minister İsmet İnönü visited Armenia in 1936 for 6 hours, and they opened this Apurian Dam. This is a major dam which provides water to Ararat Valley and part of Turkey. So I'm sure most of you remember that in 2008 and 2009, the international community was very much busy with finding a breakthrough to the stalemate that existed between Turkey and Armenia. And in 2009, in October, in Zurich, protocols were signed. There were 2 protocols. One protocol was on establishment of diplomatic relations. The other protocol was about normalization of relations. So that both parties agreed that after signing of these protocols in 2009, they will be quick to push it to the agenda of their parliaments and then to ratify the protocols and then move on towards implementation. And that included opening the borders and then establishing diplomatic representation, opening embassies. And so there was international assistance from the very start until this moment. As you see, most of the foreign ministers were there in 2009, and they supported immensely the whole process, especially USA, Hillary Clinton, who visited Armenia twice during her tenure. She was very supportive for the whole process and hoping that the process will move on. But anyway, after a little bit, after a small complication on this day, Armenian-Turkey signed the protocol. It was a big day, and people were hopeful that that this is a good indication that both countries will move forward and establish diplomatic relations. But things didn't move as fast as the initiators were hoping for, and one of the first, because they slowed down, the Armenian president in 2010 in April announced that that Armenia suspends the ratification process in 2010 unless Turkey moves forward, and he also announced that the moment that Turkish parliament ratifies the protocols, Armenia will second it. But that never happened because a number of preconditions that Turkey set forward, and the first one of those preconditions was that no progress can be expected unless there is a progress in Karabakh conflict resolution. So that became that precondition, which existed in the Turkish diplomatic language vocabulary since 1992-3, has been once again put forward, and the entire process basically stopped. And starting from that moment, when it was also already apparent that there cannot be expected any visible progress, United States, Europe, and Switzerland, they were pushing forward to find some compromise, but it seems with the passage of time, Turkish position was becoming more and more resolute. And then in 2015, Armenian president said that he decided to withdraw that protocols from the agenda of the parliament. And then recently in UN, he announced that on March 1st this year, Armenia will completely announce the protocols null and void, so that Armenia would cancel overall the protocols. So are they still relevant? And the big question is that the protocols already became irrelevant because they were agreed, negotiated and signed in 2009 under different circumstances. The mood was different. In Turkey, there was very much a positive mood. And the Turkish foreign policy was doing quite well back in 2008 and 2009. There was an international support. Turkey was in the headlines, but now the mood has changed beyond recognition, and And it seems Armenia will announce its cancellation, and then Armenia will look forward to see what are the other alternatives to find breakthrough. So this was the last major effort to find a way forward, but it seems it didn't quite work out. And I want to mention that international community were very supportive until the signing of these protocols. But after that, you could hear only rare cases of statements coming from European Union that would support the normalization process between Armenia and Turkey. And I would argue that this process needed more support after the signing of the protocols rather than before the signing of the protocols, because this was very volatile process. There was much suspicion towards each other. And it was good that the European Union could back up the process after the signing. And if you open the annual progress report of the European Commission, you see that there is no indication of this stalemate that exists between Turkey and Armenia. And the last time that a European leader mentioned about the importance of opening the Turkish-Armenian border, it was Angela Merkel. And so it's not a topic that European statesmen discuss anymore. So it's becoming, it's not on the radar of international discussions. This is a border between Turkey and Armenia. It's a old Soviet time fence. So it's the first three letters are Turcia, and the rest is going on. So the border between Armenia and Turkey has never been opened, and now you can hear very, very often that Turkish-Armenian border should be reopened, because they argue that it was closed down in 1993 in April as a result of the military operation in Karabakh. But I argue that it's not the case, because Armenian-Turkish border was never officially open, because it was only the border gates were open and on demand. Whenever there was a demand from Armenian side to allow the passage of humanitarian assistance coming from Europe, then Turkey would open the border gates temporarily just to allow the passage of this humanitarian assistance. But other than that, the border was officially closed. It was not opened. And when we talk about open border, it implies 24-hour access to the border, which was not the case. After 1993, when Turkey closed the border gates, until 2001, diplomats could use the border gates to go back and forth, not citizens. And after 2001, 2002, the border was hermetically sealed. Nobody could pass through the fences, except a few asylum seekers who could just go through the fences and find themselves either in the part of Armenia or in the part of Turkey. So this is a border 311 kilometers long that is sealed. It is mostly protected by Armenian and Russian border guards. It's an agreement that exists between Armenia and Russia starting from 1982, that the outer borders of CIS should be protected by joint forces. So the Armenian-Iranian border and Armenian-Turkish borders are protected by Russian border guards. So the Armenian-Turkish border, if it's going to be opened, then it's going to be opened and not reopened. Now, another thing that I want to touch upon is the distinction between normalization and reconciliation. One of the mistakes of the protocols in 2009, and that's my next argument, is that the protocols confused or compiled these two processes, because normalization and reconciliation, they require different toolboxes. They require different efforts, whereas both diplomats of both states brought these two complicated processes together with the hope that with two protocols, so they can push forward the process. And I guess that was one of the reasons that the process didn't move forward. And I argue that normalization is mostly the job of statesmen, of diplomats, and it doesn't involve the society at large, whereas reconciliation is a longer process. It involves not only the civil society, but also, in Armenia's case, the Armenian diaspora. The Armenian diaspora is very sensitive towards issues related to Armenian-Turkish relations, and we cannot talk about reconciliation without taking into account the Armenian diaspora, their concerns. And so from now on, I guess they understood it quite early enough, the diplomats. And now, I guess, if there will be another effort, they will be mostly concentrated on the normalization aspect. What I mean by normalization is two line of statement signed by two ministers of foreign states of both countries, stating that they agree on establishing diplomatic relations. That's it. Because when you put normalization policy in the documents, it's always a matter of interpretations, it's a matter of different approaches, and the process has a higher chance to fail rather than to succeed. So therefore, these two processes should be decoupled, they should be approached differently, and in that case, there's a higher chance that the things will move on. In the past, there have been a number of efforts to approach the Turkish-Armenian relations, and the first one, the most, until now, one of the most discussed ones is something which is called TARC. It's Turkish-Armenian Reconciliation Committee. Number of former diplomats were engaged in this committee from both sides, and also an Armenian from Armenian diaspora. They worked for 3 years, and they come up with something which was very important. They came up with a statement that what happened in 1915 was a genocide, and but it's a past event, and the societies of both states should move forward. Initially, both governments of Turkish and Armenian governments supported the process, but at one stage they decided to go back. And actually, the current Armenian ambassador to Denmark and Norway, Alexander Arzumanyan, was part of this committee. He was also the former foreign minister for Armenia, so he's currently serving as Armenian ambassador to Norway and Denmark, and he has experience in the process. The other one was Watt's workshop on Armenian-Turkish scholarship that brought together prominent scholars of Turkish and Armenian origin. They met a few times around the globe, and they produced a very interesting book which was called A Question of Genocide. It was published by Oxford University Press, and it's a good research based on years of research and discussions, and they argue that it was genocide. There is no question about this, but the whole process is how to reconcile the past and the future. There were also other projects like this one, SATER, which is Support to Armenia-Turkey Rapprochement. This one, SATMP, Support to the Armenian-Turkey Normalization Process. These two projects were funded by the European Union and USAID. And the whole, for 6 or 7 years, these projects were moving on. And they were able to organize a number of joint projects between Turkish and Armenian citizens and civil society organizations, artists, and they're doing a wonderful job. So the European Union is funding consortium of the organization in Armenia and Turkey, and they go outside outside of Istanbul, outside of Ankara, outside of Yerevan, and they talk to the people. They talk about the importance of good neighborly relations. And the last one, Armenia-Turkey Expert Dialogue Group, that has been launched 1.5 years ago, and I'm currently part of this initiative. It brought together a number of former diplomats and experts, and the whole idea behind the last initiative is things could be done without having diplomatic relations. And I've brought together four policy briefs, actually, and I'll be happy to leave this at NUPI. So what we are arguing here is that things could be done on the consular relations between Armenia and Turkey. For instance, the Swiss embassy or Georgian embassy in Yerevan and in Ankara can take the responsibility of taking care of consular affairs, because if an Armenian citizen travels to Turkey and something happens to him, he has no place to go to take care of such practical things as issuing a new passport or issuing a travel document. There are other interim policy brief. The other topic that we discuss is Armenian citizen migrants in Turkey. According to different calculations, there are around 10 to 40,000 Armenian migrants who work in Turkey who have no documents, and they're having some practical difficulties on their daily life, and so we come up with recommendations and policy consultation points so that we discuss here. The other one is educational cooperation between Armenia and Turkey. One of the things that we explored is there is a large room of cooperation between Armenian and Turkish academic institutions. Now there is much going on. Turkish students come to Armenia, Armenian students go to Turkey, but it's again, because we don't have consular affairs, this number of students, they avoid going to Turkey and Armenia. And they're also improving trade and business relations between Armenia and Turkey. The last policy brief is about this topic. So there are ways of improving the relations. So I'll leave these policy briefs here, and please feel free to take a look. Okay.
While we wait for that, could you just say 2 words about, you said decoupling normalization and reconciliation. But what about the timing? Should they go in parallel or sequential?
You know, reconciliation may take decades. So therefore, reconciliation should, they could start in parallel, but I think the best way is to establish normal diplomatic relations, and so that the border should be opened, so that people could travel back and forth, and only then they can hope to that the process can move on. So therefore, normalization, it requires political will, it requires commitment, it requires support of the international community. But when it comes to reconciliation, that's up to two societies and the Armenian diaspora. It's a longer process. So therefore, they may start in parallel, but I suspect the reconciliation can take years and if not decades. Yes. Well, I can actually move on. So the other issue that I want to discuss is Armenian genocide discourse and how it played in the whole process. 2015 was a significant year for Armenian nation because it marked the centennial of the Armenian genocide, and both nations, Armenia and Turkey, started the preparation for 2015 way too early, I would say even from 2009, even 10. And as a result of this extensive preparation, we came across something that I guess only a few people could expect. And that was the following. So in 2014, when Erdogan got elected as president of Turkey, Armenia, during his inauguration ceremony, Armenian foreign minister went to meet him during this reception, and he said, Mr. President, come to Armenia in 2015 in April. Oh, it's a good chance for Turkey to come and be present at the commemoration ceremony in Yerevan. And Mr. Erdogan, the Turkish president, very nicely said, thank you for the invitation, I'll think about this. Another invitation was made a little bit earlier. So Armenia sent 2 invitations to Turkey, but in response, and Turkey never officially replied. And then what Turkey did in 2015, in January, Turkish president invited Armenian president to come to Turkey to be present at Gallipoli commemoration ceremony. And the most absurd part of this, I would say this word without hesitation, that for years this Gallipoli commemoration was celebrated or was marked on April 25th. But only for that year, in 2015, that day was moved from April 25th to April 24th, when entire Armenian nation commemorates the victims of the Armenian Genocide. So that was done on purpose. So Erdogan decided that it's good to move one day earlier. They can distort the history a little bit, and that's what happened. So, and then a race started for heads of states and governments. As a result, Erdogan was able to bring to Turkey 26 presidents and heads of states and governments, and Armenia was able to bring only 4, but among them were presidents of France and Russia, Serbia, and Cyprus. So I would say that, and the statements of French president and Russian president were very strong, and Turkey didn't appreciate the fact that Putin went to Armenia instead of going to Russia. So, the important thing about Armenian genocide discourse is that so we have the case of the European Parliament also, when European Parliament issued 3 statements in the history. The first one was in 1987. For the first time, even before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the European Parliament used a very strong language stating that it was a genocide and Turkey should recognize a genocide. The other one was in 2005, when the European Parliament issued a statement stating that only after the recognition of the Armenian genocide, Turkey should be allowed to the European Union. And the last one was in 2015, when the European Parliament used very strong language, but it was also the European Parliament, which was ruled by conservative parties. So the European Parliament used very strong language at that time. So if we sum up the approaches of Armenian Turkey, the Turkish approach on genocide is the following: that it was that it happened during the war. It's a common pain, and Armenians suffered as much as the Turks suffered, and we should look at Armenian genocide from. It should be looked at as a just memory, as a just history perspective. Whereas Armenian approach is the following: that genocide was genocide. There was a genocidal intent behind the moves of the Ottoman government, and Armenians have nothing to do with the sufferings of the Muslims, and there should be the genocide should be approached from those perspectives. And the other issue that Armenian government is struggling is not only denial of the genocide, because the Turkish government denies the genocide, but it's also those governments, those states in the First World War which justified the genocide. And that's mostly about German government or Germany during the First World War. And Stefan Ehrig, a German scholar, who produced 2 books, and these are really important books, which talk about how Ottoman Empire was inspired by Germany, and later on how Hitler was very much inspired by Mustafa Kemal. These are very important books, and I guess Stefan Ehrig did a wonderful job in discussing the point that so until now the denial of genocide was an issue, but how about those who justified the genocide as such? So in 2015, Armenia and diaspora adopted a document which is called Pan-Armenian Declaration. That was adopted, I think there's an important document which brought together the diaspora and Armenian perspectives on how to move forward on the recognition of the Armenian genocide. And it's set very clear that from now on, Armenia and the Armenian diaspora should move on the question of reparations and retributions. Because Armenians, those who left Turkey as a result of the genocide, they left behind properties, they left behind bank accounts and number of other and also historical monuments. So what should be done with those properties? So now, so a number of different cases were opened against the Turkish government in order to, not government, sorry, in the courts, so that reparations and retribution issues and cases could be discussed. And now the last point that we are having, as of now, when we talk about bilateral relations, official relations, we are witnessing the lack of confidence between 2 states. The official contacts have decreased, and I would say that the relations between Turkey and Armenia are worse than they started in 2008. And the point is that the supporters of the Turkish-Armenian process have also decreased in Turkey. As a result of the purges in Turkey, a number of journalists, liberal thinkers, they either choose not to speak up, or they either left to Turkey, or some of them are even imprisoned, and which is problematic. So the supporters of the Turkish-Armenian process in Turkey should be increased. It mostly remained in Istanbul and Ankara and Izmir, so it didn't go beyond the big cities. The society at large doesn't know the intricacies of the delicate parts of this process, and it's good, and that has been my recommendation in the past, that these reconciliation efforts, these normalization efforts, they should go beyond big cities. The society in Turkey and in Armenia, of course, they should know more about the process, what entails good neighborly relations. And I'll stop here, and I'll take your questions. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vahram. Sorry about the technical problems here. I'm not sure what's happening, and it seems like our technical people also are not quite on top of this now. But we will, I think are we still online? Yes, so that's good, and we still have the audience here, so we'll open up the floor for questions and comments. Please, and please introduce yourself, and use the mic.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kerem Yılmaz. I'm from the Turkish Embassy. I'm the Deputy Chief of Mission. Well, actually, I would like to just make a few comments. It could actually be the subject of an another seminar. Actually, if I try to,
So we'll keep it short.
I will try to keep it very briefly. But maybe we can try to organize another one with somebody from Turkey, which has a totally different approach and view of the facts and developments. So let me tell about firstly about the normalization process, and with the protocols which were signed in 2009 in Zurich are still on the agenda of Turkish National Assembly, and we are still how to say it, is still engaged. The protocols are not drawn from the agenda. And Turkey, in the meantime, introduced numerous confidence-building measures. But it is a kind of ironic to see that Armenian officials holding Turkey responsible for the delay and for the protocols to become caduc and null and void. So we think that the Turkish-Armenian normalization process cannot be successful with only Turkish initiatives, and we hope that the Armenian side will reconsider its position and engage more in a constructive manner. Yeah, this is the first point that I would like to evoke, and the second one is about about the relocation process in the 1915. As I earlier mentioned, it's a historical debate upon which there is no consensus. And there are lots of books and scholars, academicians, describing the events, what was actually happening from a totally different perspective. And so that's why we can maybe suggest that we can have somebody from the, let's say, Turkish narrative, because there are two different narratives. The Armenian one is only from, they want Turkey to accept the facts as a genocide from the beginning, which is not acceptable, because Turkey is ready to discuss, and the Turkish archives are open. And earlier President Erdogan, when he was then Prime Minister, he proposed to establish a commission which would be composed of the historians, I mean academics, from both sides, from both narratives, and they could come and discuss, go through the archives, which Turkey's archives are open. I want to mention it again, but we see that other archives are not open. And Turkey would accept the results of this commission. At the beginning, they will declare this. We would like to see this commission to study and to reach a kind of solution on what really happened in 1915, actually. And we suppose that this is very important to decouple this process from the Turkey-Armenia relations, because Turkey wants to develop its relations Armenia as a neighbor, and we think that it is something much more important for Armenia than Turkey. Turkey is a big country with 80 million population, but it could be more useful to Armenia if the border was open and freely crossed. And just two last points about European Parliament declarations on the issue. This is our concern. Actually, we don't want to. Turkey does not want the issue to be politicized. actually this is not the duty and responsibility of the parliaments. They don't know the history better than the historians and academicians, and their resolutions are not binding. They are only politically motivated, and sometimes we see that that tendency in other countries, which is related to some also sentiments against Turkey, and due to the political popularism in these countries. And you earlier mentioned a German scholar who had written books on the issue. Well, Turkey's concern also is that we see some countries are trying to find out some complicits, and Holocaust is something totally different, which is defined by law and which was judged by a tribunal which was competent. And for the relocation process in the 1915, that was never the case. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we will not find any solutions to the conflict here today, but it's good to hear that also the Turkish side is ready for reconciliation measures, and we would be happy to follow up with another seminar on the Turkish perspective in the future. Should we collect a few questions, I think, and there is a microphone there in the back.
Yeah, just.
Is that okay?
Yeah, but let's keep it comments short. And
Yeah, but I mean, this is the same Turkish policy as ever. You deny the genocide, and then you say that some people want to blame Turkey for it. There are two countries in the world that deny the genocide: Azerbaijan and Turkey. Nobody else denies that, and this is denial. It's the same as the Holocaust. The scholars everywhere in the world, they say that there was indeed a genocide, and Turkish scholars can't even say it because you're arrested. According to paragraph 301 in the Turkish law, you get arrested if you say that there was a genocide. I think this is really strange that you meet up here to tell us about the denial of the genocide. Nobody buys that anymore. European Union accepted it. Everybody's accepting it. If you ask people in Norway, they will accept it as well, except the government, because as soon as somebody accepts it, Turkey has countermeasures. And this is a big shame. I understand the Armenians very well that you need somebody to say that there was a genocide, pay the reparations, and then move on. This is a very difficult issue. And when you're restoring history as an ambassador or whatever from the Turkish embassy, sitting here telling these lies that you publish everywhere, saying that there was no genocide, scholars say that this is the same as the Holocaust, and you deny it. The Germans don't deny it, Turkey denies.
let's keep it short, and then it's a question.
Yeah, this is my short. I'm not identifying myself because I don't want a phone from the Turkish embassy tomorrow. I got that before, thank you.
Identify yourself, and let's try to stick to questions here and not develop into long. But please, okay. Now it's in the back.
My name is Kjell Stamnes. I'm a private citizen here. Two questions. What other barriers are there today to develop either a normalization or reconciliation, except for the story about what happened in 2015? What are the other barriers? And the second question is, if the main barrier is back to what happened in 2015, excuse me, 1915, it's more than 100 years ago. Isn't it time to look forward? How long shall a history 100 back be an obstacle?
Yeah, if I may add one question as well in this round. There have been a lot of ups and downs in Turkish-Russian relations over the last few years. And how does Armenia fit into this? To what extent do this shift in Turkish-Russian relations affect the possibility of progress in Armenia-Turkey bilateral relations?
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, Mr. Yilmaz, thank you for coming and for contributing to this discussion and for representing the official position of Turkey, which I found a little bit different than what Turkish Parliament, Turkish Prime Minister and President have been saying since 2013. In the slides, I had a bullet that in 2013, starting from 2013 in April, just before April 24th, the Turkish Prime Minister and then President Erdogan issued a number of statements which were very positively received in the world, that that Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan and later on Davutoglu stated that they sent their condolences to the Armenian nation for what happened during 1915 and during the First World War, not only to Armenians but also to Assyrians and Greeks, to all the minorities who lived. And it's really interesting that and he accepted that during the genocide, during the First World War, things happened that were responsibility of the Ottoman government, and they didn't protect their citizens. So, and it's so what you are saying now a little bit different from the official position of Turkey. So I'll take the note of that, which is interesting. When you say that, that's ironic that Turkish government. That Armenian government is not moving on with the ratification. I have to say, well, if Turkey holds the protocols in their agenda, which is true, they still hold the protocols in their agenda, and Armenia still does. In that case, why Turkey is not ratifying the protocols? If Turkey is so committed to the protocols. And Turkish government and the Turkish Prime Minister said repeatedly that they want to establish this committee of historians. That was even included in the protocols as a sub-commission of historians. Armenians agreed, even though there was a huge criticism towards the Armenian government, why they agreed with the Turkish demands, why they agreed to establish this committee of historians. The protocols mentioned that Armenia has agreed. Why afterwards Turkish government still proposes to establish the committee of historians? It implies that there is a wrong interpretation of the protocols from the Turkish side, or they just forgot what they agreed upon. I want to talk about this. And the committee of historians, and there has never been a precedent in the world history, when the historians came together, they issued a final book or paper, and they said, this is your destiny, go live with it. There has never been such a precedent in the history. And this committee of historians has been proposed in the mid-1990s. It got a popularity among many people. But when you look behind that, it's an inefficient effort. And this WOTS that I mentioned, Workshop of Armenian Turkish Scholars, that brought together scholars, prominent Turkish scholars, prominent Armenian scholars. So who else do you think would come and discuss the Armenian genocide issue that will be very authoritative, and the people will say, oh, I trust the work of this committee. So it's a self-deceptive initiative. What you said that it's Armenia that needs the opening of the border. But you know what? Opening the border is not a favor that Turkey will be doing. It's a last closed border of the Cold War. And it's a country that is a candidate member of the European Union. And that country is closing the border of Armenia, and making Armenia a landlocked country without having access to Black Sea ports or Mediterranean ports. Okay, so I think it's not a favor. And to second what was just said, yes, it's true. Genocide word is not even allowed to use in the Turkish parliament, along with Kurdistan. These two words are not prohibited to use in the Turkish parliament. And those who use, they may have difficulties with the Turkish law-abiding institutions. And when you say the relocation process, yes, That's Turkish position, but it's not only about relocation. The genocide process in every type of genocide is composed at least 7 steps, and what you say relocation is only one of those steps. And so let's and once again thank you for your comments. I find them useful. And to your question that what are the barriers? What is important to note that Armenia stated for years that Armenia sees no preconditions for the normalization process. And by saying no preconditions, that also applies that Armenia doesn't see the genocide issue. The official Yerevan, official Republic position is that it doesn't see genocide issue as a problem for normalization of the process. So that's the official position. And I guess it tells a lot. Or that Armenia is really interested in opening the border, in establishing diplomatic relations, and then moving on to discuss other sensitive issues. Yes, 2015 seems like history, but it's part of nowadays, part of everyday Armenian history. So the fact that so many Armenians live outside of Armenia, that we have the genocide, we have the diaspora is also partly due to the genocide, because many Armenians had to leave the Ottoman Empire and fight refugee in many parts of the world, and that was because of genocide. So the genocide is part of everyday life. It's injustice that has occurred to Armenian nation, and that should be justice should be served. That's what is deeply felt. But again, it's not a part of official precondition. Armenia set no precondition towards Turkey. So Turkish-Russian relations, Helge, that's a very important question. And if you analyze the situation, of course, the first question that comes to your mind, what is Russia's position on Turkish-Armenian relations? One would expect that Russia would support the process because Russia wants to have its strategic allies' border with Turkey be opened. But Russia's position is difficult to interpret because from time to time they make statements which seem very supportive, but on the political level, the implications are not that easy to read and decode. Yes, one would think that because currently Turkey and Russia currently are having good relations, they may push forward some processes and open the border, but unfortunately it's not the case. And if Russia would like to, they can certainly work together with their Turkish partners and move the process forward. But at the same time, it needs to be mentioned that some circles in Armenia think that whenever Turkey and Russia are doing good or their relations are improved, then there's a higher chance that something could happen that would not benefit Armenians. That's a reading of the history. But it's geopolitics, it's diplomacy. There's so many factors and variables involved in this, and it's the Turkish-Armenian relations are as complicated as the relations between other nations. Of course, on the other hand, Russia understands that if the Turkish-Armenian border is opened, then Turkey will have a higher say and a more important say in the South Caucasus. And if you look at the South Caucasus, it's only Armenia that doesn't have open borders, doesn't have diplomatic relations. The Georgia link is an important link for Turkey with its relations with Azerbaijan, and Turkey has been very careful to preserve and to develop relations with Georgia. And if you look at the Turkish policies in Georgia, it's quite effective from Turkish perspective, and which also makes many Georgians, especially conservative parts of Georgian society, the religion, also the church, Orthodox Church, to feel more and more anxious and more uncomfortable with Turkish, what is called penetration into Georgia. So these are the things that make more uncomfortable many Armenians. I mean, for instance, Armenians living in Javakheti region, in Javakh, they feel uncomfortable. And also opening discourse, Akhalkalaki Railway, that many people interpret it as another way to isolate Armenia. So it's many projects that set the context for these difficult and complicated relations in the South Caucasus.
Let's keep it brief, but I just also wanted to ask you one thing, because you said that the protocols are still on the agenda in the parliament in Turkey, but is there any kind of movement, or are they just on the agenda without any steps being taken towards ratification? Could you give us an update on the situation?
For your comments, and I took note of them as well. Of course, I am here a representative of the Turkish embassy and Turkish government, so it's normal that I express the Turkish state's views and opinions. But let me clear that our approach has not changed since 2013. I just wanted to very briefly give a perspective from the Turkish side so that everybody in this room can have an idea of what is being taught on the other side. If not, we see always, we share the sufferings of the people, Armenian people, in 1915, but we see it as a common suffering because at this area there were lots of Turks, Kurds and Muslim populations who have suffered a lot because this was a front line of the war, Turkey against Russia, and this was a common suffering. We never deny the sufferings and losses of Armenian. At that time, Armenians were our compatriots, actually. It was our citizens, we were citizens together. So we never deny their suffering. So that it is clear that our position has not changed since 2013 after the condolence letter of our president. And we are still, our position is that to advocate for free speech, free discussion of two perspectives, not to see the other ones as deniers, because there are lots of historians and academicians not from Turkish origin, American scholars, academicians, or from other nations, historians, experts on Turkish Armenia issues, which consider the events as not genocide as well. So this is the point, and thank you once again. And concerning your point, yes, the protocols are still in the agenda of the parliament, but as Mr. Vahram earlier mentioned, after the declaration of the Armenian officials to declare the protocols null and void, I don't think that we will get any progress, but they are still on the agenda, and we want to see further steps from the Armenian side to move on. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Tatiana Rastovetsky, the University of Oslo, Slavic Studies. I truly agree that reconciliation demands time, and the wounds of the past, they need much time to heal. And you mentioned several or many committees, and I see that the soft power efforts are still being made, so probably two sides are making some steps to narrow the gap. And my question is about the sentiments, like general sentiments of the population, precisely younger generation, the generation of the millennium. Are they still the same resolute or concerning this problem, or they are ready to be open for communication, for scholarship, for visiting each other? Do they ignore history? Do they leave history to the history, or they still continue?
No, like I said previously, thank you for the question. And like I said previously, genocide is part of everyday life, and I do not exaggerate that. one of the best ways to answer your question is to be present on April 24th commemoration ceremony, when for decades, since 1965, after the 50th anniversary of the genocide that is officially accepted, millions of people every year walk up the Tizanakabert monument and they pay tribute. And among them, most of them are young people. They now go, their parents, when their grandparents, when it's something very close to everybody. If you ask a question to an Armenian, like who are you, what is your name, and the second question, where your ancestors come from, and most of them mention that they come from what many Armenians refer to as Western Armenian, or the eastern part of current Turkey. And they mentioned the former cities where they come from, and it immediately brings question, oh, my ancestor is also from there. For instance, I come from, my one part is from Alaşkert, or current Elazığ, and the other part is from Kars. Many people have some very historical, strong roots in Armenia, in historical Armenia. So therefore, the young generation, the generation millennium, they are also very much committed, but also very practical, very pragmatic. They want to move on without forgetting the past. And so it's not a zero-sum game. There is always a way forward, and they understand it very well. And I teach at the American University. Students are very much interested in defying, in challenging the existing paradigms about Turkey. One of the reasons that I got into the Turkey studies was exactly that the black and white approach towards Turkey should be revised. And Turkey is a country that has rich history, that has many societal levels, and it's totally wrong to look at Turkey from Turkish Armenian genocide perspective only. There are different minorities, identities in Turkey, and all of them want to be recognized. And that's a message that I want to give to the young generation, to different talks and workshops that I attend, that we have to understand Turkey from within. The Kemalist identity that has been imposed on Turkey for decades now has been revisited. New identities are emerging in Turkey, and it's just interesting to see and observe this. So, and this is a message that the young generation is getting, and they want to know the history very good, but also move on and to talk to their Turkish friends from Turkey, because there are many Kurds also, Alevis, Zazas, who come and visit Armenia, and Armenians go and visit them. Different research have been conducted recently on emerging identities in Turkey, and it's quite fascinating. How young people are, both from Turkey and Armenia, are working together in workshops, in summer camps, in summer schools, and coming up with very interesting findings. And that's and I imagine that could have been much more productive if there were diplomatic relations, because, like I said, many young people are afraid to go there just because of practical reasons. But in spite of that, many choose to go because it's interesting, and Istanbul is a very vibrant city. Many headquarters of international organizations have moved to Istanbul. It's an interesting city to walk, and there are many historical monuments. There are still Armenian quarters in Istanbul. The cemeteries, the graves of many great poets, Armenian poets, are still in Istanbul. It's a city that has as much Turkish history as Armenian history, and Greek and history, and Jewish history. And young people want to explore this.
Okay, you mentioned briefly during your talk that one of the reasons for the current impasse in the relations is also the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, one of the reasons why the border remains closed. So could you say a little bit about the development or the lack of development in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict?
Okay.
And how this affects the situation?
Yes, as you know, Karabakh conflict still remains unresolved. It's one of the bloody conflicts in the post-Soviet space. I would say it's the most bloody one. Until now, Armenia and Azerbaijan haven't been able to find a resolution to this conflict. So the current diplomatic efforts are around the principle which are called Madrid principles. The Madrid principles are a step of measures which include Armenian withdrawal from the territories that are surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh. In return, people of Nagorno-Karabakh get the chance for referendum of self-determination, and after that, a number of steps will be taken to deploy peacekeeping forces, and they hope the process will move on. But however, there is no consensus how to move forward. Which one of those 6 steps to prioritize? Because for Azerbaijan, the territorial integrity comes first. For the Armenian part, non-use of force and self-determination, rights of self-determination comes first. So the conciliation of these two conflicting principles is the core of this conflict. Recently, the two presidents haven't met for quite a long time, but recently they started to meet, restarted to meet again, resumed their meetings. The foreign ministers meet quite often. You know, the entire negotiations goes under the auspices of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairmanship, which includes Russia, France, and USA. In the past, there have been 5 joint statements of these 3 presidents, which were very supportive, urging both presidents to show the political will to agree on the basic principles of the resolution process. But it's still you feel lack of confidence. The lack of the contacts within societies have basically disappeared. Before 2006 and 2005, you could still see Azerbaijani scholars visiting Armenia and having joint projects. Some civil society organizations were working together to build confidence for confidence-building measures. But they stopped after 2009 or 10, and there are basically no contacts between societies. And unfortunately, from time to time, we also observe the violation of ceasefire on the front line. The last escalation was in 2016 in April, when the ceasefire was violated, and there were a number of casualties from both sides. That was first time since 1994 ceasefire that such a violation occurred. And unfortunately, the international community is too busy with other things on the agenda, and the Karabakh conflict, resolution of Karabakh conflict is not in the agenda. Now the entire issue is about confidence-building measures between 2 presidents and their armed forces, hoping that they will respect the 3 recent agreements in Vienna, in St. Petersburg, and in Sochi, and hoping that both parties will agree to impose on building confidence-building measures by enforcing activities that would investigate the violation of ceasefire instances. Unfortunately, not much is going on, and as a result, just the contrary, as a result of April escalation, Armenian armed forces totally modernized the front line. It's currently a different front line, and it seems it's a trench war basically. It's a war that seems to drag around for a long period of time, and yeah, there is no resolution in sight.
But with this block, progress on the Armenia-Turkey border, or is it possible to decouple this?
That was the whole purpose. I mean, it seems Turkish government has agreed on, initially on this, because otherwise they would not go and sign the protocols. Because when you read the protocols, there is no mentioning of Karabakh conflict. It does mention about the peace in the regional peace in the region, but it doesn't have a direct reference to the Karabakh conflict. So it seems they agreed, but later on, I guess also Azerbaijan was very upset that the protocols were introduced and signed, and I guess that was also one of the reasons. And I say one of the reasons because there were other reasons that Turkey didn't ratify the protocols. So Azerbaijani pressure or influence was one of the reasons that Turkey didn't ratify the protocols. And decoupling them would be one of the best ways to move forward, because in that case, the Armenian government would have more flexibility in negotiations. But now it's very much stuck into this black and white paradigm that I guess is not quite beneficial. So therefore, it seems the international community was also supporting this decoupling Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and Turkish-Armenian relations. But it seems that other than signing and being present in Zurich, there hasn't been much done to really decouple these two processes.
We have still time for one or two questions, if there are anyone interested. Okay, if there are not, I would abuse my prerogatives as a moderator here and ask one last question, and not about Turkey, not about Azerbaijan or Nagorno-Karabakh, but about the constitutional amendments and in domestic politics in Armenia. You have adopted a constitutional amendment. You will introduce a parliamentary republic, I guess after the presidential elections in March. And could you say a little bit about the background and what you think will come out of this?
Yes. Yes, that's true. In December 2015, Armenia has voted to change its governing system. So it has moved from a semi-presidential system to parliamentary system. Now the the prime minister will have a major say in state affairs. The president will be the head of the state. Armenia. And the same already happened to Georgia. So Georgia was able to go from a presidential system to a parliamentary system. And Armenia also decided that it's a better way for building a democracy, a lasting working democracy, and they are moving towards this direction. So it didn't happen overnight. Sorry. And they changed the constitution in December, but they gave like 1.5 years to change the entire system, and 2 years actually. So only starting only in April, the new constitution will completely come into force, and that was done on purpose, of course, because the entire system should be changed. So in order to make it as smoothly as possible, the government decided to take it slowly, and. Yes, now on March 2nd, there will be presidential elections, and unlike Georgia, where the society elects the president, in our case, the parliament will be electing the president, and it's going to be the first ever case that independent Armenia will choose its president through the parliament. And after that, the president will be serving 7 years, and there will be parliamentary elections every 5 years. The entire system is changing, and it's really interesting to see that how international community is also supporting this transformation. The Venice Commission has been very supportive, and a number of organizations, international organizations, are also supportive of this transformation. And I don't know, the government assures that it's going to be a better democracy. Of course, Armenia is not an ideal democracy, but there is a hope that there will be more checks and balances. The opposition in the parliament will have a major say or more say, and there will be, and then we can hope to have a better functioning democracy, because time is passing. It's time to move on from this post-Soviet transformation cliché It's time to move on to build a democracy that is inclusive, that has that gives more power to society, to the opposition. And so let's see what will come in a few years' time.
We'll have to invite you back in a few years' time to discuss that. But as for now, I would like to thank you very much for coming. And thank you very much to all of you for coming to this seminar today. It's still early for me, I guess. You're also very welcome, if you're interested in Russian politics, to come back next week on the 9th of February. We will have a seminar with Professor Irina Busygina from the Higher School of Economics, where we will discuss the relationship between foreign policy initiative and the lack of domestic reform in the Russian Federation. So welcome back next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.